Ilia Topuria beat the greatest featherweight of all time and then beat the greatest striker in that division and still ended up being number 4 in the pound for pound list. And John Jones is ranked above him at number 3. Renato Moicano beat Benoit St, a man who was one fight away from a title fight and put up one of the greatest first round performances ever and still did not end up moving a one single spot in the lightweight rankings. The rankings have been a mess for years. And obviously, Dana White has complained about this multiple times.
Cleo Roundtree fights that badass fight against Pereira and the morons rank him number 8. Literally this week, I have a meeting to try to fix the rankings. We're not far away from AI actually doing these rankings. It'll be a great day when AI starts doing this shit. So the ranking system drives me crazy from the pound for pound to each division. There's huge mistakes.
Though pushing John Jones to be number 1 is pretty hilarious, rankings being a problem is an actual fact. So I looked into it and what I found was absolutely crazy. It was borderline disturbing and it was so incompetent. I cannot believe that this is on purpose. Let's talk about it right now. UFC rankings are scored by a voting panel that consists of fighting media outlets, and every month they send their list and an average of the list gets published as the official rankings. And here's the official UFC website explaining it. On the surface, this sounds like a good process. There's nothing wrong with it. So if this fighting outlets whose entire livelihood is based on covering the sport of MMA and the UFC, who knows the sport, who watch the sport and knows about these fighters, get the opportunity to make the rankings, it can't go wrong, right? Right? Well, obviously it went wrong. So how is this even possible? At this moment, there are 20 media outlets in the voting panel in total. And these are those fighting outlets. Do you recognize any names in this list? You don't? Well, I don't blame you. Me personally, the only name I recognize in this list is MMA Weekly. Outside of that, I don't recognize a singular name here. So why don't we all get to know about these media outlets a bit better? Out of these 20 outlets, let's take a look at the ones who are actually pretty decent. Because it's easy to get it off with because there aren't a lot of them. Blood and Sweat. This is a Russian media outlet and it's fairly active. They have 556,000 YouTube subscribers and the engagement rates are pretty good. And I assume the content is pretty quality too. Though it's important to mention that they speak Russian and I don't understand Russian, so this well could be complete gibberish. And this is the best media outlet out of all these 20. So below your expectations, Kusal. We are in a downward spiral moving forward. MMA Oddsbreaker, fairly active media outlet, and they have been on YouTube for 13 years and has only 3.9k subscribers. And they have been on Twitter for 13 years with only 8.7 thousand followers. More than a decade, but with actually little to no audience build. So safe to say that they are not necessarily a relevant media outlet or a one with a big audience. Next, MMA NYTT. They also actively publish MMA articles and they call themselves Europe's biggest MMA media outlet, and they have 2,000 followers and breaks a whopping 2 likes per post. The biggest European MMA media outlet. Great stuff here, guys. And then MMA Weekly, the only name that I recognize in this list. And they are fairly active and they have 148,000 Twitter followers, 16,000 Instagram followers and 800,000 YouTube subscribers. Now, on the surface, these are massive numbers, right? But their actual engagement rates are lower than 1%. Not even 1,000 people from their audience actually tune in to like or view their content. And I want you to know, we are still talking about the best outlets from this list. And then Top Turtle Podcast with 5,800 Twitter followers and a whopping average 2 likes per tweet. And the final decent media outlet, Kimura.sc, which is a Swedish-based MMA media outlet that is active. However, they have 2,400 Twitter followers with 0 likes, and actually scrolled a lot and I still couldn't find a tweet with a one singular like. And 6,800 YouTube subscribers and barely past 500 views. And these are all the media outlets that I can personally categorize as decent to good. However, it's still fine because they're active and hopefully they'll watch the events, right? They know the fighters. But now let's move into not so good, or in other words, completely irrelevant, bizarre media outlets that for some reason in this voting panel. But do you know what is relevant? Liking this video and tapping that subscribe button. Guys, it helps me out a lot and I really appreciate it. And let's get right back to the video. Fighting news. This is an active media outlet. Now you may be asking, what's wrong with it? Well, they exclusively cover boxing. But for some reason, UFC has given their MMA voting ranking rights to this boxing exclusive media outlet. And next, Boxeo Mundial, an active YouTube channel with around 166,000 subscribers. Not sure whether you caught it, this is also a boxing media outlet. And now this is the second boxing exclusive media outlet that has given the permission to score UFC rankings. Next, Fight Network, an active YouTube channel with 160,000 subscribers that barely breaks 1,000 views. And they seem to cover wrestling nowadays for over half a decade, and they haven't mentioned the UFC in years. So I'm genuinely happy to see a relevant media outlet that covers the UFC in the UFC voting panel. Why? Why is a media outlet that covers wrestling has the opportunity to do the UFC rankings? But this isn't the only media outlet. Next, the Wrestling Observer, an active outlet that once again covers wrestling as the primary focus. Now we have two boxing outlets, two wrestling outlets, really relevant people covering the UFC rankings there, guys. Gazeta Sportivia, this is an active media outlet that focuses on sports, but their primary focus is on football and F1. They might talk about UFC here and there, but that's not their focus. Now, you can make your mind up, sure, they might not exclusively cover the UFC, but they might have one guy who watched the UFC, so this is excusable, right? But the same cannot be said for the ones I'm about to mention now. Burbank Leader, a local newspaper in California. And when I went through their news articles, I could only find two news articles relating to the UFC, and both of them are about sponsors. Cherokee Scout, another local newspaper based in the Cherokee County in North Carolina that obviously talks about the news that happened within the Cherokee County. A guy called David Brown randomly makes UFC rankings, but it is not consistent, and it's about, couple of times a year. And that is the only relevance to the UFC I could find within this local newspaper. I want you guys to know, these are not even well-established newspapers that are scoring the UFC rankings, but local newspapers from random counties, from random areas. Here's 105.3, which is a radio station that no longer even call themselves that. They call themselves now Rock 105.3 because they are a rock radio station and they have no relevance to the UFC except for writing one or two articles about the UFC once a year. CFMU 93.3, another radio station, but this time a university-based radio station run by Canadian university students. And the only primary things they talk about are things such as theatre, music, arts and crafts, and sports in general is not even one of their main topics. The only UFC-related content I could find was a podcast called the Hammer Podcast that they run inside this radio station. But however, to give you a perspective on how much CFMU cares about the UFC, the last time their Twitter account mentioned the word UFC was back in 2016. So far, I went through 6 media outlets that do primarily cover the UFC, but has little to no engagement rates or an actual audience, and 9 media outlets that has nothing to do with the UFC except for 1 or 2 blog posts they write once a year. And these guys are getting the opportunity over actual well-established MMA media outlets. Because remember, we are not talking about a sport that doesn't have media outlets. MMA Fighting, MMA Junkie, MMA Mania, Spinning Back Fist, and we have dozens of well-established independent creators, all the way from journalists, reporters to YouTubers. But these random media outlets are getting the opportunity to do the rankings over these guys. And if you think that's weird and something is going on behind the scenes, it gets much weirder. It gets so weird, I genuinely cannot believe that this is actually real. The remaining 5 media outlets will blow your mind because they don't exist. Yeah, they don't exist anymore. Buzzsprague.sc, they don't exist. The last time they posted on their Twitter was back in 2017, 7 years ago. Bladersport.com, they also don't exist anymore. The only social media accounts I could find that were relating to them was a Facebook account that has 385 followers and a Twitter account with 14 followers. Inside Fighting Radio no longer exists and have not posted anything on their YouTube for 5 years. MMA fight coverage, thank God they at least have a website running, but they haven't posted anything since 2022. And then finally, MMA Soldier obviously no longer exists, and it's run by a guy called Rodney James Edgar, and he's somewhat active on Facebook, but his actual media outlet no longer exists. And these are the people who are scoring the UFC fighter rankings. No sh**, the rankings are a mess. Who could have guessed? 6 outlets who have subpar audiences, 9 outlets that has nothing to do with the UFC, and 5 outlets that no longer even exist. I'm actually more surprised by the fact that we even have a ranking system going on. And the craziest part about this is, as I mentioned earlier, this is happening in a sport where there are thriving MMA media outlets and thriving MMA personalities. So why does the UFC keep on doing it? Unless, they need to lie about the rankings and make it up for themselves. And that is obviously not the case because Dana White goes to a press conference every single month and then cry about the rankings. So then what's the reason? The reason is sheer incompetence, sheer negligence for a core element of a multi-billion-dollar promotion. Listen, I don't want people to be perfect. I don't want companies to be perfect. I don't want promotions to be perfect, but we are not talking about a fighting league that your uncle runs in your backyard. We are talking about the most valued MMA promotion, one singular MMA promotion that outperforms the entire sport of boxing financially. UFC brings in billions of dollars every single year and is publicly traded alongside WWE under TKO and is worth billions of dollars. Listen, I love the UFC. I cannot care about PFL or Bellator, even though I like one championship, and I love Dana, pink ball head. But sometimes the incompetence is too much. I have no option but to indeed call you guys out. This is not how a professional fighting league's ranking system should be conducted. And if you don't want to pay attention to it and want to completely neglect it, then you can't come out to press conferences and then create this whole drama around rankings being broken, when you guys are the reason the rankings are broken in the first place. So how are we going to fix it? Well, Dana White, or if someone from the UFC is listening, which the chances are low, but I hope they do, option number one, the easier path. Change the media outlets. Remove every single one of these media outlets. There isn't a singular person that deserves the right to tell which fight should be where in the rankings. None of these people are full-time media outlets, and even if they are, they don't make enough quality content for people to make an audience around. So replace the current media outlets with actual MMA media outlets. I'll give you a bunch of examples. MMA Fighting, MMA Mania, MMA Junkie, Sherdog, Spinning Back Fist, and every other MMA media outlet that's well established and have full-time people working for them. And also add journalists, people like Kevin Early, Oscar Willis, and even people like James Lynch. People whose full-time job is watching the sport, covering the sport, talking to the fighters, and know what they're doing. Also add former fighters and MMA media personalities and increase the voting panel so one person's opinion on the rankings does not influence the actual rankings by a lot. And with this, you get the most generalized and the most agreed upon rankings by the best in the MMA media space. And all of this can be literally done within a day. Get the people who are in charge of the rankings, put them in a room, tell them to reach out to these fighting outlets and to accept or decline this offer. And when it happens, go back to the usual schedule. Every single month they send the rankings, you guys make it. Well, the second, however, is more interesting and I think is the ideal way of doing the rankings. When media outlets or personalities score these rankings, it's subjective. Everyone has their own biases, and sometimes everyone might agree that a certain fighter might be better than the other, even though on paper they might not. So to combat that, what we can do is have a 50% subjective and 50% objective ranking, meaning take the whole MMA media outlets scoring the fight ranking system, and then also make a system that is point-based. If a fighter wins a championship fight, they get 5 points. If a fighter wins a non-title fight, they get 3 points. If a fighter loses a fight, then they get -1, -2. If they fight a ranked opponent, they get more points compared to an unranked fighter. And if they fight quite often, then they can have a point multiplier. This way, regardless of each other's opinions, we have a system that is entirely objective. But as I mentioned earlier, that is only the 50%. We also need the more entertaining, more flashy fighter to get more points. So now we have the 50% subjective by the media outlets. I believe this is the perfect ideal ranking system. And actually, a group of people called Fight Minds made this system already. The 50% objective system. They have a point system that score each fighter and then have a fall-off curve that deducts point depending on the time duration. So either the folks at the UFC can reach out to the Fight Minds or just look at their system, create something similar. Change the number of points, add more additional points like, point multipliers, pair that up with the already existing system, and you're good to go. And none of these, either the option number 1 or the option number 2, takes months to do. Matter of fact, it only takes a couple of days to do. The objective system I explained to you is so simple, I can probably sit down at my desk and completely program it with little to no programming experience within a couple of hours. And the fact that people who are making 6 figures at a multi-billion-dollar corporation is incapable of doing this is genuinely crazy to me. I mean, to be fair, it's not like any of us really care about the rankings. Rankings have never been important for years, right? Maybe except for the pound-for-pound rankings, nothing else really matters. We have never done fights looking at the rankings. Fighters don't get paid more just because they are on top of the rankings. A good majority of the matchups are decided by how entertaining the fights are, the personality of the fighters, and who drive the money. And UFC cares about it, and so does the fans. So why are we even having the conversation in the first place when either you can take a day off and fix it or just disregard it completely? So Dana, and the folks at the UFC, let's do the one or the other. Let's either fix this ranking system that does not take even 24 hours to do, or let's just completely neglect this and stop mentioning it in every single press conference. You never cared about it, neither did the fans. And that's it, folks. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking the video, because then YouTube pushes this video out for more people. And if you want to watch my future content, please consider subscribing, and then YouTube will recommend my future videos when I upload them. And hey, check out this video. UFC changed their rule set. Now 12 to 6 elbows are legal, and they changed the definition of grounded opponents. Now knees and kicks to the head of grounded opponents are still illegal, but with a new definition change, it's a completely different situation. Check out the video, I clearly go through it. And I will see you again in a couple of days. Signing out, my name is Kusal.